The nest is on the edge of a lake that leads into the Vineyard Sound, facing west. In lucky years, eggs appear in the nest in May, chicks in June. In July, the juvenile ospreys learn to fly. By September, the family is gone, headed to the Caribbean or South America for the winter. When we bought our house in 2005, my husband James became obsessed with the osprey couple, with the magic of their annual return to the same location. He was always anxious, waiting to see if they would appear, if they would produce eggs, if the eggs would survive raccoons and crows, our local predators. Every year, he celebrated when the juveniles flew for the first time. He drew me and our 3 young children into the drama of the ospreys, pointing them out as they soared above us, leading us in yelling, "Hi, Ossie!" and waving at the sky. He took us into the woods to see their nest wedged high in a tree. He befriended 2 local osprey experts, older men who invited us to watch them tag an osprey at dawn. They attached a device that would track the bird's movements during the winter. The kids, still in their pajamas, were awestruck by the creature that looked so much larger on the ground than it did in the sky. The experts named the tagged osprey after me and sent us updates on Belle's progress throughout the winter. We worried for her and toasted her return. After raccoons ravaged the osprey's eggs 2 years in a row, the experts installed a pole in the same area as the original nest, designed to deter climbing animals. The tree stayed empty for a few years, and then, to our astonishment, a small nest appeared. The nest grew steadily, becoming more majestic every summer, a landmark visible to swimmers and boaters across the lake. After a decade, it measured more than 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall, one of the biggest nests on the island. When we arrived on the vineyard in March of 2020, the nest was empty. The birds were still warming themselves in the southern hemisphere, perhaps beginning their pilgrimage back to the island, making their way over the Caribbean Sea and Florida, continuing north, hugging the coastline, as a virus, first found in China, made its own explosive journey through the United States. My husband and I walked around the pole in our wool hats and parkas, our boots sinking in the marsh. The nest was intact, unchanged from the previous fall. Even in the bitter air, even with sharp sticks poking out of every side, it looked strong and stable, welcoming. We smiled at each other and talked about the couple's return. Would we be here to see it? After the COVID-19 pandemic shuttered New York City, where we lived most of the year, we decided to quarantine on Martha's Vineyard with our 2 youngest children, then 15 and 12. It made sense to move to the vineyard. Our house there was isolated, and it was our favorite place in the world. The hedge fund where James worked had gone remote, and my legal work could be done from anywhere. We arrived on March 15th. The island was still firmly in winter, with temperatures in the 30s, the trees barren, and the light flat. An icy wind whipped around us as we unloaded the car, unpacking sweaters and boots, the girls' textbooks and cellos, one larger than the other. James set up his home office on a card table in the living room, rising at 4 a.m. to worry over the markets. He cut 3 different kinds of wood and built gorgeous fires in the late afternoon. He made me whiskey sours as the sun set. We believed reports that whiskey would kill the virus, and locked every door of the house at night, even though the island's population was sparse and, like New York, in lockdown. He seemed proud of his role as father and husband, nurturing us, protecting us. I went for walks, tried to keep up with house cleaning and laundry, and watched the news throughout the day. There were images of overflowing emergency rooms, hospital tents in Central Park, refrigerated trucks filled with corpses. More than 20,000 people had died in New York City. There was no vaccine and no timeline for one. Even in our isolation, even with our privilege, I was afraid. I often sought out James in the woods. Out of our daughter's earshot, we would talk about the latest pandemic news, whether we should wear masks or gloves to the grocery store, if we needed to isolate grocery bags and packages before we unpacked them. James would kiss the top of my head as I hugged him, gripping the back of his sweater. Our younger daughter, Carrie, discovered Fortnite and played remote games with her friends in our guest bedroom, her small body dwarfed by a giant armchair. Our older daughter, Evie, wanted to learn to make fresh pasta. She started with gnocchi and served it for dinner on March 21st, the first night of spring. James made a roast chicken to accompany Evie's dish, using our outdoor grill as an oven, standing on our deck in the dark, adjusting the knobs, making sure the temperature stayed at 400 degrees. It came out perfectly, moist and golden brown. We ate at our rectangular wooden table in the kitchen. I wore pajamas with a thick wool sweater and socks, my hair still wet from the shower, piled into a bun on the top of my head. The wind howled as we ate. James seemed distracted and kept eating the gnocchi directly from the bowl rather than serving himself, a pet peeve of mine. He removed the oyster from the chicken, the piece he'd taught the kids to covet, and gave it to Carrie. I FaceTimed our son, Finn, who was staying with his friend's family on Long Island, joining a group of teenagers. At 17, we knew he would be happier with his friends, and we thought his time away from us would be limited, a couple of weeks at most. I held up my phone so we could all see his face. We told him we missed him. After we finished eating, James left the kitchen to make a work call. The girls went to the living room to watch television. Alone, I soaked the pans, loaded the dishwasher, wiped down the table. As I was filling a bucket with water and white vinegar to mop the floor, my cell phone rang, glowing and vibrating on the kitchen island. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. When my phone pinged to register the message, I put down the bucket and pressed play. It was a man's voice. He sounded young and nervous. He said, "I'm trying to reach Belle." He paused. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your husband is having an affair with my wife." He gave his name and number. I froze, feeling dizzy. The words didn't make sense. I gripped my phone and pressed the play arrow again, listening to the man's soft voice for the second time. I thought, this can't be true. This must be a mistake. James will explain this. I leaned the mop against the island and went to find him, descending our stairs just as he ascended them. He was coming to find me. He looked anxious, worried. He put his hand on the small of my back and guided me into the guest bedroom, the room set up with Fortnite, with empty packets of cheddar bunnies on the rug. He sat down on the couch. I sat in a chair to his right. There was a long pause, as if he was collecting his thoughts, searching for the right words to make this go away. I thought he would do that. He would make it go away. I waited. He took both my hands, leaned forward, and looked me straight in the eye. He said, "I promise you, this meant nothing. It's over. I love you and only you. I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed." I asked, "How long has it been going on?" He answered, "Only a few weeks." I looked down at his hands, at my body, and felt ashamed of my matronly pajamas and my socks, an oil stain from dinner on the thin cotton of my pajama pants. His platinum wedding band on his ring finger looked scuffed from years of wear. My fingers, underneath his, were bare. I had taken off my rings, including my diamond wedding band, the day before. A friend had told me that the virus could hide under rings, evading Purell and soap, so I had pulled them off, dropping them in a jar of jewelry cleaner. For a split second, I thought, did taking off my wedding ring cause this? Did I shake something loose in the universe? "What is her name?" I asked. "It doesn't matter," he said. "I'm going to call her husband back, so you might as well tell me." He said the name. It was generic and, like my maiden name, alliterative. It sounded sweet. "Where did you meet her?" I asked. He said she was a banker. They'd met through work. He said, "We had this attraction." He pulled his hands from mine and held them up to demonstrate the force pulling them together, his hands cupped, fingers spread like he was holding a basketball. But I swear it didn't mean anything. "Does she have children?" I asked. He nodded and said, "She has 2 kids." "How old are they?" He paused and said, "They are little." "How old are kids when they go to nursery school?" 2 or 3. He nodded again. "That's how old they are." I thought, how does a woman with a big job and 2 toddlers have the time, the energy for an affair? Carrie called for me. "Mommy, can you make us turnovers?" I jumped, hearing her high, sweet voice reorienting me. The girls. We would need to pretend everything was fine, that a bomb had not just exploded. I called back, "Okay." I left James in the guest room and returned to the kitchen. I turned on the oven and set 2 frozen Pepperidge Farm raspberry turnovers on a baking sheet. My kids had loved them since they were little. I had too as a child. I put the sheet in the oven. No longer able to contain what felt like a rising explosion, I walked to our bathroom, stepped into our shower, and closed the glass door to muffle my gasps, my wails. I sat down on the shower bench, between the shampoos and soaps, and texted the man who had called me. "Can you tell me how long this has been going on?" It felt like the most important thing in that moment, to know when the affair started, to know if James had told me the truth. He responded, "I think a month, but I can't text because my wife has tried to kill herself. She's in an ambulance." I felt panic then. James's betrayal was going to cause waves of damage beyond me, beyond our family. This was a crisis we would need to manage together. I began to worry too, for the young woman in the ambulance, speeding through the empty streets of New York, undone by what had transpired that night, in her house and mine, as if she were my daughter and not my husband's mistress. I left the bathroom and went to find James again, moving through the living room and down the stairs, wanting to relay the news quickly, as if my speed might save her. I found him standing outside the guest room. He was on his cell phone. I knew, somehow, that he was talking to her. I asked, "Do you know?" He put his hand over his phone and said, "Yes, I'm trying to hear what she is saying." I waited as he walked away from me, into the guest room, to finish the call. His posture, the hunch of his back, his free hand cupped over his mouth, looked intimate, caretaking. When he came back, putting the phone into his pocket, he said, "She took a few sleeping pills. She's fine." He looked relieved. My sympathy, my worry, shifted to astonishment. She had taken the pills the moment James's wife of 2 decades, had learned about her? Wasn't I the one who was supposed to fall apart? Wasn't he supposed to be worried about me? She had captured my husband's attention, his care, when I needed it most. I don't remember exactly how I spent the next hours. I know I took the turnovers out of the oven. They had cooked too long, becoming too crisp, too brown. I know I returned to the bathroom. I know I called my stepmother, Susan, and told her what had happened. She yelped in shock. While I was on the phone with her, Evie knocked softly on the door. The doorknob turned slowly, cautiously, and then stopped. I had locked it. "Are you okay, Mum?" she called through the door. I steadied my voice, raising it an octave. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm fine. A friend is going through something." She told me later that James had sent her to the bathroom. He had said, "Go check on Mommy." I texted 2 close friends, Maria and Anna. "James is having an affair." They both answered immediately, confused, writing, "What?" They called me in succession. I didn't answer. I curled into a ball on the cold tile and stayed there for a long time. I imagined the weeks ahead in lockdown, keeping things stable for the girls, doing therapy with James on Zoom. We were stuck together, in the same house, on an island. I thought, this is going to be a nightmare. I could not imagine forgiving him, but I also could not imagine a life without him. I loved him so completely. At 3 a.m., I walked through the quiet house and found James sleeping in Finn's bed. He looked peaceful, breathing steadily, like nothing was wrong. The girls were asleep in their room next door, both turned to the wall in their twin beds, under their matching yellow and white flowered duvets. I hadn't put Carrie to bed, something I still did every night. I thought, she must have been happy, staying up past her bedtime, assuming I had forgotten. I went back to our room and got in our bed, James's side undisturbed. I tried to sleep but couldn't. I felt leaden with dread. The scenes of the night kept replaying in my mind. The voicemail, James's admission and apology, the suicide attempt. And I could not make sense of it. I could not place what had happened with what I knew of my husband. A kind and mild man, a devoted husband and father. I hadn't drawn the curtains, so I saw the sun rise over the lake. I could tell it would be a beautiful day, crisp and sunny. At 6 a.m., James walked into our bedroom, fully dressed, in heavy boots and a black parka, the same clothes he'd worn the night before. He was holding a large canvas tote bag. His green eyes were narrowed and icy, an expression I had never seen before, entirely different from how he had looked at me the previous night. Before he said a word, I knew that something, Everything had changed. He said, "I've decided I want a divorce. I'm leaving." As he spoke, I could not absorb what was happening, what he was saying. I thought the end, or the survival, of our marriage would be my choice. He said, "You'll be fine. You're still young." I was 50. I asked, "Are you going to see her?" He said, "Yes. I would like to make sure she is okay." I told him that her name did not appear on her firm's website. I had done a Google search and thought, maybe illogically, the whole thing could be a scam. He scrolled through his phone and showed me an announcement of her recent promotion. She had an impressive resume, including a degree from an Ivy League business school. He looked proud, impressed. And then he walked out the door. The girls were still asleep when he left. When I heard their movements, their steps on the stairs, my door opening, I pulled back James's side of the duvet to make it look like he had slept there. They got in bed with me, warm in their matching monkey print pajamas, their hair tousled with sleep. I tried to smile as they curled against me, hoping I could hide the red blotches on my face. I said, "Daddy had to go back to New York for work." Carrie asked, "Why didn't he say goodbye?" I paused, trying to find an answer. "He was in a rush to make the first ferry." I called James repeatedly over the next 5 hours while he was on the road, but he didn't answer. He called back when he reached New York. I could hear him park the car in the garage, hand the keys to the attendant, walk down the street. He said, "I thought I was happy, but I'm not. I thought I wanted our life, but I don't." He said, "I feel like a switch has flipped. I'm done." He said, "You can have the house and the apartment. You can have custody of the kids. I don't want it. I don't want any of it." Of all the words he said, it was custody and house that took my breath away. He was giving up our kids and the vineyard? This was not just an affair. This was not just a rejection of me. He was abandoning all of it and all of us. In the days that followed, I continued to try to hide the truth from the girls. A therapist I spoke with said I should wait to tell them until the pandemic was less scary. It was still March, the second week of lockdown. We thought it would be over soon, or at least that the worst of it, the deaths, the shutdown, the unknowns, would end. But instead of easing, the pandemic had become more frightening, and so had I, appearing at dinner with swollen eyes and unwashed hair. I cried quietly as I did laundry and scrubbed our toilets. I spent hours behind the closed door of my bedroom. I decided not to drink, knowing it would make me sadder, but I also found it hard to eat, my appetite disappearing, my throat thick. I called James every few hours, in closets, bathrooms, the garage, the woods, anywhere the girls couldn't hear me, crying in heavy jags, begging for some explanation. He was always nearly silent. He wouldn't tell me what was lacking in our marriage, or in me, or how long he had felt this way. He denied that it was because he was in love, a reason that would have hurt, but at least made some sense. When he spoke, he was completely calm, his voice low. His composure made me feel like I was wrong to be upset, to be so messy and confused, like what was happening was something I should absorb quickly and easily. I never asked him to change his mind. I knew that this was not possible. He was too certain. But I wanted him to at least try to walk me through his decision, for him to show some concern for me and the kids, even if he was leaving. He gave me nothing. It was like a wall had been erected between us. Me on one side, flailing in my despair, him on the other, cold as ice. His only answers were, "I don't know," and once, "You didn't do anything wrong." I begged him to do therapy with me on Zoom. He refused. And then he stopped answering my phone calls. He texted, "I'll answer what I want, when I want. I'll speak when I want. I'll decide when I want." Had life been normal, had we been in New York, had I been able to find him on the street and make him look me in the eye, maybe I would have some understanding of what was happening. But I was on one island, and he was on another, and I knew nothing, only the shock of his disappearance. I texted him, "I think I'm going to die." He didn't answer. In the middle of one night, I became convinced that he had fathered the toddlers, the children of the woman with the alliterative name. In my shock and disorientation, even this seemed possible. When I called him at 1 a.m., he answered, the late hour taking him off guard. I said, "Are they yours?" He answered, "Stop. You have lost your mind." And then he hung up the phone. I felt like I had lost my mind, like his exit had transformed me, suddenly, from an intelligent, stable wife and mother to an unhinged lunatic. A mad woman. Somehow I had become the dangerous person in the story, the volatile character, rather than he, the man who had left his family. While he refused to talk to me on the phone, he sent one clear message by text. He planned to tell people that our separation was amicable, a joint decision. He said it would be better, for my own well-being, to say that I had wanted it too. He assumed I would agree to this false narrative. His expectation made sense. In most things, for 20 years, I had deferred to him. I believed in his wisdom, that he knew the right answer. I tend to be a compliant person generally. I didn't break a single rule in school. I was an obedient daughter, a diligent lawyer. My older brother loved to call me Belle the Good. I am also shy, private, and avoidant of confrontation. I didn't talk at all until I was 3 years old, and I rarely spoke as a child after that. Every teacher comment on every report card, from kindergarten through college, noted that while bright and performing well, I needed to say more in class. Whenever I did speak, my face would turn bright red. As an adult, I learned how to make small talk, but stayed quiet, remote, sharing my intimate thoughts and problems with only a few close friends. For what felt like the first time, I refused James's advice. I replied, "No, I won't say that." I would not lie about this, about what was happening to me. This boundary felt clear to me, even in my confusion, even in my despair. James refused to tell his own family, his mother, brother, and sister, that he had left us, so I told them, sending an email 2 days after his departure. They were upset and worried. His brother, sister, and I texted back and forth throughout the first bleak days, trying to figure out what had happened, as if this were a puzzle we could solve together. James's sister was outraged by the LinkedIn photo of the woman James was seeing. She was 35, but looked 20. She tracked down the woman's parents, trying, unsuccessfully, to stop the affair. And then, suddenly, on April 1st, 8 days after James walked out, his family cut me off. In a joint text, his siblings said that, in order to support James, they could no longer be in contact with me. The bluntness of the message, their coldness matching James's, stunned me. I'd been a part of their family for 20 years. Carrie didn't seem to sense anything was wrong. She was a child who saw only what was in front of her. Her classes on Zoom, a TikTok dance, her Fortnite games. She arrived at the table ready to eat, not caring what her sister and I gave her, as long as it was piping hot. She accepted the story that her father was working, even though all of Manhattan was shut down. Evie texted me in the middle of the night, a few days after James left, saying something cryptic about how she knew I had a lot on my plate, that I shouldn't worry about her. When I read the text in the morning, I went to find her, my heart beating fast. I didn't know what I would say to her. She was still in bed, alone in the girls' yellow room. I sat down at her feet. I said, "Can we talk about your text?" She answered softly, "No, it's fine." "What did you mean by it?" "Mum, please, it's fine. I don't want to talk right now." Her voice was firm now, definitive. She pulled up the duvet and rolled over, turning away from me. I thought, should I press her? Should I insist on an answer? What if she doesn't know? I waited a few more minutes, hoping she would give me some kind of signal, some direction. But we both remained silent. She started cooking for us almost every night. I thought it was a new passion, an expansion of her interest in pasta making. I know now that she was trying to feed me. She made risotto with saffron, and used the leftover rice to make arancini the next day. She baked homemade falafel and served it with hummus, warm pita bread, Israeli salad. She perfected a pan-seared steak, learning how to spoon butter and thyme over it as it cooked. She found a bolognese recipe on Instagram that was much better than mine. She watched me carefully as I ate. I tried to take a few bites of the meals she placed in front of me, even though I felt no hunger. I called the parents Finn was staying with, people I had never met, and told them what had happened. They were separated, on their way to divorce, but living together during lockdown. They promised to keep my secret until I was ready to tell Finn. By April, they had almost a dozen kids staying with them, a group they called their quarantines. They made sure Finn attended Zoom school, ate well, and got some exercise. The mother taught him to do his laundry. The father worried over his sleep apnea and ordered him a special pillow from Amazon. When I thought about Finn so far away, I felt a deep ache. I yearned to have him under my roof, to have my eyes on all three of my children. But I was also relieved that he was not with us, that he wasn't stuck in a house of girls, a house that felt heavy with sadness without any of his friends, and that he was protected, for a time, from knowing that his father was no longer there. I tried to get through each hour, each long day. Lockdown meant that no one in my family, none of my close friends, could get to me. No one could pick me up off the bathroom floor. No one could enter the house in a friendly bluster, distracting the girls with games or movies. No one could sit with me on the couch and grip my arm as I recounted what had happened. I do not like the phone. As a shy person, it makes me anxious. But it was my only lifeline. When I told my mother, calling her from the garage the first morning after James left, she was outraged and fierce in her defense of me. She had always loved James, but she had experience in the end of relationships, the end of marriages, the disappointment of unfaithful men. To her, it was not murky. She said, "You must cut him out of your heart, like a cancer." My brother, Carter, and his wife, Charmaine, called often, both shocked that James had cheated on me, that he had left us during lockdown. My brother said, "Give him time. I'm sure he will come back." Two friends called me early every morning. Anna, a friend from boarding school, worried for me as one would a sister. We had known each other for 35 years, having met in our small dorm when I was 15 and she was 14. She was compassionate and wise, her personality completely authentic, with no channel for falseness. When I heard her voice asking gently, "How do you feel today?" I knew she really wanted to know, that she would wait and listen. Our conversations often lasted for over an hour, beginning as early as 6 a.m., continuing as the sun rose. A friend from Brooklyn also called early, never missing a morning. She was casual and chatty, talking about the pandemic, sharing a funny story about teaching her fourth-grade students on Zoom, discussing her plans to adopt a dog. We rarely delved into the drama unfolding in my life, but her calls were comforting in a different way than Anna's. I knew, even in her breeziness, that she was checking on me, trying to make me feel less alone, less scared. Maria, my Swedish friend, was there at night, at every hour. We communicated by text, a format we both preferred. I think she must have slept with her phone in her bed, with alerts on, so she could text me back right away. Those were the darkest moments, at night. There were times when I thought I could not make it to the morning. The pain was so intense. My stepmother, Susan, called me several times a day. We were very close, bonded from the moment she entered my life in 1972. She wept with me, both of us quiet as we cried. She was the only person who tried to reach James. She emailed him in the second week, writing that in her 45 years of practice as a family therapist, she had never seen someone leave a marriage so cruelly. She begged him to speak to me, to do therapy with me, to try to end the marriage kindly, honorably. He was furious. He texted me that, because of what Susan had written, he was going to continue his affair. He texted me that because of what she had written, he would give me nothing at all. April on Martha's Vineyard feels like a snowless February. The light is flat and the temperatures stay low, the wind brisk. It rains a lot. Flowers and trees don't bloom until May. Easter was late that year, exactly 3 weeks after James left us. I made cinnamon rolls, a laborious recipe requiring the dough to rise twice, and they came out of the oven as hard as hockey pucks. I trudged around the woods, hiding plastic eggs with clues inside, a treasure hunt for the girls, a family tradition since I was a child. I wore a dress, trying to appear festive, and boots to manage the muddy areas. An hour into the effort, I realized I had messed up one of the connections between clues and had to redo the hunt, starting from the beginning. I felt desperate in this moment, like I had reached the point when I would break into pieces. A sad, middle-aged woman in a dress and boots, disintegrating into the lake. But as I moved toward the osprey pole, planning to hide an egg at its base, I saw wings rise and a head appear. And then another head. They were back. I thought, I need to tell James. He will be so happy. And then I remembered he was gone. By late April, I knew I could not keep hiding the truth from the kids. I texted James that it was time to tell them and that we needed to do it together. We hadn't spoken in several weeks. He said he thought it would be better if I told them alone.
Initially, I agreed with him. I was afraid that he would expose us to COVID. He was not in quarantine. He was having an affair in the middle of New York City. We decided we would do a family Zoom call to break the news. James's boss texted me the next day. He was a kind man and a friend to both of us. He wrote that he understood why I was angry, but I needed to allow James to be there to tell our kids. He spoke from experience, having been divorced, having broken the news to children himself. He wrote that he was giving James his seaplane and pilot to fly to the vineyard. I tried to defend myself, explaining that James did not want to come, that he didn't want custody, that he was having an affair, that he was unrecognizable to me, that it was dangerous to have him appear in our house. But as my text bubbles appeared, as I reread each note, I could see how I might be perceived. A bitter woman lashing out against the man who had left her, and potentially jeopardizing James's job, his livelihood. I needed to be calm. I needed to be accommodating. I needed to shut up. And he was right. James should be there in person to tell the girls. I thanked him for giving James the plane. James met the pilot at an airport in Connecticut. Before he boarded, we called Finn together. James told him that we were divorcing. Finn was quiet. James and I kept talking, alternating back and forth, trying to assure our son that everything would be okay. For several minutes, we didn't realize that Finn had hung up, maybe as soon as he heard the headline. I called the parents he was staying with, asking them to go look for him. I imagined him running across an open field, trying to flee the terrible news. But they found him in their basement, surrounded by his friends. The father said, "Don't worry, we've got him." James landed on the vineyard just before 2 p.m.
He drove down our driveway in a Jeep our caretaker had left for him at the airport, a model similar to the one he'd driven onto the ferry a month earlier. He walked up the brick path to our door. He wore a mask, so I couldn't see his whole face. But my first thought was that he seemed happy. His step brisk and optimistic. He was carrying an empty duffel bag over his shoulder. He said he had only 90 minutes until he had to return to the airport. We gathered in the living room, on the side we rarely used, where 2 white couches flanked a large coffee table. I sat between the girls on one of the couches, my arms around both of their small shoulders. James paced back and forth in front of us, still masked, the glass doors of our living room and the expanse of the lake behind him. He said, "Mom and I are separated, and we're going to divorce. I haven't been happy." He continued to pace while he spoke, not looking at either of the girls, not looking at me. I watched him thinking, the way he is moving and talking is so different. I don't recognize his body, his voice. Is he having a breakdown? Is he in love? Is he just delighted to be free of me, of us? As soon as he said the word divorced, Carrie twisted her body to face the back of the couch. She was smiling. She thought he was joking. Then she looked at me, saw my grave expression, and shrieked. I tried to grab her, but she fled down the stairs, wailing in agony. Evie sat still and silent, with her arms crossed. James turned to me and said, "I'm starving. Can you make me a sandwich?" I stared back at him, shocked. I didn't know what to say in front of Evie. I tried to reason out an answer. Wouldn't a good mother make their child's father a sandwich? Wasn't this how the world said you were supposed to behave in a divorce? Be nice to each other in front of the kids. I said, "Okay, but please go find Carrie." I went to the kitchen. With my hands shaking, I toasted slices of sourdough bread, spread mustard, layered turkey, sliced avocado and tomato, sprinkled sea salt. I thought, if I'm doing this, I'm going to do it well. I will not make a shitty sandwich. Maybe part of me thought that it would make him regret what he was doing. How could he leave a wife who made such good sandwiches? I thought this even though, in that moment, I didn't want him, this version of him, to stay. I put the sandwich on a white plate with a bamboo rim and sliced it in half. I looked at our collection of cotton napkins and selected one in a blue flowered print. I roamed the house looking for him, carrying the plate and the napkin. He wasn't with either girl. Carrie was in the guest room, curled on the couch. Evie was in her bed, the covers pulled up, looking at her phone. Evie told me later that before she'd gone to her room, James had taken her out to the lawn with one of his slingshots, explaining that it was now her job to keep the geese away. He showed her how to insert the pellet, pull back the sling, aim, and shoot. I finally found him in the basement. He had several cardboard boxes at his feet. He was squatting in front of them, rummaging through the contents, papers and folders and notebooks. I watched as he pulled down 2 more boxes. He was sweating with the effort. I asked him what he was doing. He turned to me with the same cold green eyes I'd seen the day he left. He said, "I'm looking for our prenup. If you have it, you have to give it to me." The prenup was missing. My lawyer from 1999 had died, and his firm had no record of the document. James couldn't reach his lawyer, now retired, and neither of us had a signed copy in our email. I stood there, at the top of the basement stairs, holding the plate, watching him. I told him to stop, to be with the girls during his remaining minutes in the house. But he continued, pulling box after box off the shelves. His duffel sat open on the floor beside the boxes, ready to receive what he found. He finally gave up his search when it was time to go back to the airport. He ate the sandwich quickly as he stood by the front door. I told the girls to come say goodbye. They leaned against the banister, staring at him. He said, "The ospreys are back." I nodded. "Yes, we've seen them." When he walked to the borrowed Jeep, the girls and I got in our Toyota, a big family car, to pick up Chinese takeout from one of the only restaurants open on the island. I wanted to leave first, before James. I didn't want my daughters to see their father drive away, his car disappearing over the hill. I feared the image would stay in their minds forever. I should have known it was the image of him pacing in his mask, not looking at them as he delivered the awful news that would stick. The girls and I ate together at the kitchen table, watching Gilmore Girls as we did each night. We'd seen every episode multiple times, and the familiarity was soothing. My phone pinged. It was a text from James. "That was a great visit." I stared at the sentence, stunned. He had rewritten the wrenching scenes we'd just lived, making them something different, something happy. I didn't write back. A few weeks later, he sent an email with no message, only an attachment. It was a scan of the prenup. His lawyer had located it in a storage facility. When I opened the document and scrolled to the last page, I stopped at the sight of my own name. My signature looked innocent and hopeful, in blue ink and careful script, dated 5 days before our wedding. Part 2. Male ospreys court their mates. They identify a breeding area, an ideal location for a nest, and then practice a series of aerial maneuvers. When a female appears, the male performs his routine. He flies above her, often as high as 300 feet, pauses, fans his tail feathers, and dives down again, toward the water, toward her. He usually carries something in his talons, a fish or something to build a nest. Sticks, bark, grass, seaweed. The male calls for the female as he flies, a sound like a whistle of a tea kettle. This courting is called a sky dance. Once they reproduce, the couple is usually monogamous. They mate for several years, often for the rest of their lives. James and I met in 1998 at Davis Polk, a large corporate law firm in Midtown Manhattan. The firm occupied multiple floors of a skyscraper above what used to be the Grand Central Post Office. It was modern and luxurious, all blonde wood and glass, with sweeping views of the city from every office. It was a place I never should have been. In high school, I wanted to be a writer. I discovered writing in my first year and won several prizes for fiction before I graduated. When I arrived at college,
I applied to a selective writing seminar. After submitting a sample of my work, I was admitted to the class, one of only 2 freshmen. I shared my first short story in October. It was about a family spending the day on the beach. I can't remember much more than that. What I do remember is a senior telling the class that it was terrible, that I couldn't write. His name was Greg. He was tall, white, and very punk rock. Short, spiky blonde hair, a torn concert t-shirt, big black combat boots, a leather jacket. His analysis included nothing specific about my story. It was a blanket judgment about quality and talent. The teacher, another man, said nothing. After a few minutes of tense silence, a female student rose to my defense, but it was too late.
I had taken Greg's assessment as the truth, storing it in every cell of my body. I changed my focus to public service, and I was frenetic about it. I volunteered in a nursing home as a big sister and a GED tutor. I manned a legal services hotline at Boston City Hall. It was as if I were trying to beat the writing dream out of me, drown it in altruistic purposefulness. I graduated, did a fellowship in New York City government, and went to law school. I spent the summer after my first year of law school at the Criminal Defense Division of Legal Aid in Brooklyn, a gritty place with lawyers sitting wherever they could find a free desk. Even as an intern, I was able to be second seat in a trial, assisting a lawyer in a grand larceny case, the robbery of a deli, which ended in an acquittal. I did more defense work during my 3rd year in law school, representing a 12-year-old boy in family court, defending him against a charge of climbing into his neighbor's window to steal her shampoo. He was given probation. I loved being in a courtroom. I didn't feel shy there. I could prepare almost every part of it, the direct, the cross, the closing statement, the map of it becoming clear in my mind. How to present a case, how to take a witness where I wanted them to go. During the spring of my 2nd year of law school, a swarm of elite law firms came to campus to hold interviews for summer associate positions. We put on suits, met with partners, and compared our callbacks, invitations to visit the firms for more interviews. I was swept up in all of it, the sophistication and achievement of it, the courting. I collected a dozen offers and chose Davis Polk for its reputation and, if I'm honest, its sleek and glamorous interiors. My father was surprised I didn't pick Cravath, the most prestigious of New York law firms at the time, but their offices weren't nearly as nice. Davis Polk continued to seduce us all summer long. Our workloads were light. We were invited to lunches at the grand restaurants of the era, Boulet, Vaughn, Montrachet. They threw us lavish parties at the Central Park Zoo and the Empire State Building. I worked in the litigation department and, in early July, was placed on the defense team for a well-known tobacco company. I spent 2 weeks in a windowless conference room at their headquarters in Kansas City, reviewing binder after binder of board minutes, a painfully boring task, which also felt morally compromising. Still, there was glamour to it, defending a famous company, searching for incriminating evidence, working on a team with the best minds at the firm, including a future U.S. Senator. At the end of the summer, Davis Polk offered me a permanent position, pending my graduation from law school and passing the bar exam. I wavered. I was still drawn to the prestige, to the idea of a few years at the firm serving as a legal finishing school. But I knew my true interest was in criminal defense. I like to think I would have chosen the public sector had my life remained stable, had everything not fallen apart. On January 22, 1996, during my 3rd year of law school, after a long group study session in my apartment in the West Village, I went to bed late. Eager for sleep, I shut off my phone's ringer. I turned my answering machine's volume down to 0. At 8 a.m., I woke to the sound of the building intercoms buzzing. I walked the few steps from my bed to my small galley kitchen, feeling cold and confused by the sound. I picked up the handset. The doorman said, "Your aunt is trying to reach you. She says it's an emergency." I turned to look at the answering machine in my living room. It was blinking frantically, the number 14 flashing. I hung up the handset, walked to the machine and pressed play, still half asleep. The first 5 messages were from Susan, using my childhood nickname. "Flo, call me, it's urgent. Flo, where are you? Please call." And then a series from my aunt, my father's older sister. Then several hang-ups. I called the number at my father and Susan's apartment uptown, My aunt answered. I said, "What happened? What's wrong?" She said, "Just come right away." "Tell me now, what happened?" My aunt was a loving person, but always blunt. She said, "He's dead. Your father is dead." I called my mother. She answered. I began to sob. She tried to calm me down, trying to find out what had happened. She asked, her voice rising, "Is it your brother?" I said, "No, it's Pa. He died." She said, "I'm coming." She arrived in her station wagon 30 minutes later, still in her flowered bathrobe, and drove me up Madison Avenue, leaving me at the awning of my father and Susan's building on East 83rd Street. The doorman took me up to their apartment in the service elevator. I can't remember why. I had thrown on jeans, sneakers, and a sweater, which now felt hot, itchy. I pulled at the neck. It was normal weather for January, in the 30s, but it felt much warmer. The air in the elevator was still, stifling. In the apartment, there were at least a dozen people milling around. Several of my cousins, an old college friend of my father's, my brother and his wife, Charmaine. They had all picked up their phones. They had all answered when Susan and my aunt called, while I was still asleep. I stood in the entryway, waiting for someone to notice me. My father and Susan's housekeeper grabbed me. She said, "You should see him before they take him away." Before I could refuse, she pulled me down the hallway by my wrist to the door of my father and Susan's bedroom. He was lying in bed, on his back. His shoulders, above the sheets, were bare.
I learned later that his body had been on the ground, moved by the paramedics so they could work on him on a hard surface. And then, after they declared him dead, placed him back in bed. The covers pulled up, his eyelids closed. I wished that someone had dressed him. He looked so vulnerable. Standing in the doorway, I could not process what had happened. My father was 54 and looked even younger, like the California boy he was. Tall, fit, tanned, a full head of blonde hair. It did not seem possible that he could die, that I could never see him again. My father was a magnetic, larger-than-life figure, the center around which Susan, my brother, and I orbited. He was born and raised in Beverly Hills, his father a photographer and movie producer, his mother a silent film actress. He was a diligent student, an altar boy, and a devoted son who, as a teenager, wrote long letters to his parents every week from his Catholic boarding school in Rhode Island. He met my mother, Amanda, when they were both in college, he a senior at Harvard and she a freshman at Wellesley. They fell swiftly in love and married in Roslyn, New York, in 1964. It was a large and lavish wedding, with trumpets, 12 bridesmaids, and 19 ushers. She was 20, and he was 23. Their marriage made headlines because both their families had bold names, signals of American wealth and privilege. My mother's ancestors include John Jay, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and Henry Morgan Tilford, a founder of Standard Oil. My father was descended from the Vanderbilts. My mother's mother was Babe Paley, a fashion icon of that era, and the wife of Bill Paley, the founder of CBS. As newlyweds, my parents lived a glamorous life. They had a grand apartment in the Dakota, hosted and attended notable parties, and made regular appearances in gossip columns, on best-dressed lists, and in Vogue magazine. My mother was famously beautiful, with dark brown hair and almond-shaped hazel eyes. She was photographed by Richard Avedon and Irving Penn. My father was drawn by Andy Warhol. They were called the It Couple, the Fun Couple, the Young Locomotives, and in one fictionalized account, the Moonflower Couple. The moonflower symbolic of beauty and romance. My father went to law school, worked for Robert F. Kennedy as a legislative assistant, and after Kennedy's assassination, ran for a position in the New York City Council, becoming, at that time, the youngest person ever elected to a seat. He was politically progressive, co-founding the New Democratic Coalition and drafting one of the country's first gay rights bills. The same year he was elected, at age 28, he bought a controlling interest in the Village Voice, beginning a lifelong interest in media, later merging The Voice with New York Magazine and selling his stake to Rupert Murdoch, a decision he eventually regretted. My brother was born in 1967, named Shirley Carter after my father and grandfather, and I was born in 1969, named Flo Bell after my father's mother, the stage name she had created from her given name, Florence Bell. Flo Bell died 4 months before I was born. At her funeral, my father concluded his eulogy by announcing that if I was a girl, I would be named for her. He had not discussed it with my pregnant mother, who sat, stunned, in the front pew. She decided I would go by Belle, her small rebellion. My parents loved each other, but they were too young, too immature to make the marriage work. They fought a lot, both had affairs, and divorced in 1972, when I was still 2. By the terms of their joint custody agreement, typical at that time, my brother and I saw our father only every other weekend, on alternating holidays, and for a few weeks in the summer. He was not a hands-on father, but he enjoyed us and wanted more time with us.
He dreaded Sunday nights, the moment we left him, when we were taken back to our mother's apartment. My father met Susan shortly after he and my mother divorced. Susan was 23 and dazzling in a different way than my mother. 6 feet tall, with long, thick blonde hair and blue eyes. A social worker and former homecoming queen. Born on Long Island and raised in Ohio. She turned my father down at first, disliking his reputation as a socialite, but finally agreed to an early dinner at the Ginger Man on the Upper West Side. Within an hour, they both knew they would spend the rest of their lives together. The attraction and chemistry between them instant. They discovered they had the same favorite book, The Brothers Karamazov, and they walked through Central Park after dinner to the Doubleday bookshop on 5th Avenue so my father could buy her his favorite anthology of poetry. They were joined that night, threaded together in both intellect and heart, and they never again parted. My brother and I loved Susan immediately. She was young and fun and gathered us up, spending hours making sandcastles with my brother on the beach in East Hampton, dining on soups of toilet paper at my pretend restaurants, reading to us at bedtime. The weekends my father had custody, she picked me up at school on Friday and took me to buy a bologna sandwich wrapped in white paper from a deli on Madison Avenue. Or if my father was with us, to Mellon's for a bacon cheeseburger and cottage fries. Susan and my father married in our living room in 1977 and brought me and my brother on their honeymoon to Lassa Manor, a new beachfront hotel in St. Martin, a place we returned to every spring for almost 20 years. My father and Susan were, to me, the perfect couple, my example of a great marriage. When I think of them, I see them dancing together in our kitchen, the same height, their long legs in blue jeans, their arms around each other. My father was the flower, needy of attention, and Susan was the gardener, a natural caretaker, and that dynamic worked for them. They experienced the world with a similar lustful curiosity and sense of fun. They conducted Beethoven's Ninth Symphony in bed together every New Year's Eve. They drank red wine and played chess late into the night. They hosted friends for lively dinners and long weekends at their house in Watermill on Long Island. They were adored for being genuine and relaxed, never pretentious. They loved dogs, especially pugs, a passion my father acquired from my mother. At one point, they had 5 of them, 4 fawn and 1 black, all named after members of the family, all allowed to sleep on their bed, a chorus of snoring. My father was an intellectual, reading several books a week, mostly history and biographies. But he loved less erudite culture too. He had more than a dozen magazines delivered from a newsstand every Monday, a stack we could not touch until he had read them all. He was a great writer, always composing on large yellow legal pads with black felt-tip pens, in a distinct, nearly illegible scrawl. He wrote an adventure tale on one of those pads for me and my brother, reading installments to us on Saturday nights in his study as we drank mugs of warm milk mixed with honey. He had an extraordinary eye as a collector. In the 1960s and 70s, he bought paintings by Jasper Johns, Frank Stella, and Mark Rothko, among others, a collection he sold in the 1980s to finance his real passion: first editions of 20th century American literature. An epically unwise trade. Many of those paintings are worth millions of dollars today. My father and Susan's apartments, at the River House on East 52nd Street, and later on 5th Avenue, and their house in Watermill, were filled with all his collections, including drawings, wooden staircases, bronze sculptures, and hundreds of pieces of treen, voting boxes, perfume bottles, miniature shoes. Almost every room had shelves filled with his books, the regular ones next to the collectible first editions, the latter in custom-made black, red, or brown boxes. My middle school years were filled with the sounds of him opening boxes of books and cutting reams of clear plastic to cover them. I had to angle myself slightly to get to my bedroom because he had installed bookcases on both sides of the narrow hallway. My father was handsome, always carrying the air of the California boy he had been, but perfectly dressed in an East Coast way, in Savile Row suits, Turnbull and Asser shirts, and John Lobb shoes when formal, jeans, long-sleeved polo shirts, and driving shoes from Hunting World on the weekends. He smoked a pipe at all hours of the day and carried leather pouches of Dunhill tobacco in his jacket pockets. He loved food, both fine dining and junk, equally passionate about the French restaurant Lutèce and Big Macs. He could eat 2 in one sitting. He loved to travel and packed meticulously for every trip, filling large black Hermès suitcases with his clothes and a portable stereo to play classical music. He wore a man purse, Hermès too, slung across his torso to hold his wallet and traveller's checks. He loved shopping of all kinds. He was generous and spoiling. He never let anyone else pick up a check. He was charming and funny and often outrageous, swearing without hesitation, saying inappropriate things. But he was also introverted. He always preferred to stay home over going out, and he hated the phone. We were most similar in this, in our shyness, our introversion. My father was not always easy. He was moody and had a temper, occasionally a scary one, but usually more like a child who needed to be managed. He yelled and stomped his feet, literally, when he didn't get his way. When he napped on weekend afternoons, we had to stay completely quiet, moving carefully around him, anticipating a period of intense grumpiness when he woke up. My brother also had a temper, and my father said his mother did too. It was accepted as a Burden family trait. Susan could manage him and my brother. She didn't wilt or retreat, but also allowed it to go on. In this environment, I became even quieter, more cautious, watchful. My father and I were close in many ways. We had inside jokes. Every time we were in a car, from childhood well into adulthood, I would ask him, "Where are we going?" And he would answer, "Puerto Rico." I can't remember why. He wrote me letters in the voice of each pug when I was at sleepaway camp. And we bonded over collecting. I had my own, less expensive collections, stacks of Dannon yogurt tops foraged in my grade school cafeteria, puffy stickers placed in photo albums, porcelain figurines, and, most passionately, Archie comic books. When I was little, he bought me all the latest issues, Archie, Jughead, Betty and Veronica, from a small comic store on 2nd Avenue, and showed me how to create a catalogue, which I typed onto thin onion skin pages. On my 21st birthday, he gave me Archie #1 from 1942, placed in a custom black box, the name and date in gold on the spine. My father was proud of me, of my studiousness, of my decision to become a lawyer, following his example. He told me this often. But when he died, we were still parent and child, shy people who had not yet broken through. As I stood in his doorway, looking at his profile, his skin beginning to drain of colour, I was not yet conscious of all that he would miss. Weddings, grandchildren, growing old with Susan. All I could feel was the horror of death, the shock of it, the sensation of being completely unprepared. In my father and Susan's bedroom, their housekeeper said, "You should kiss him goodbye." She and I were both Catholic, as was my father. It was what one was supposed to do. But I couldn't bring myself to move closer to him. I shook my head and left the room. I found Susan in the kitchen. We held each other, crying. My brother put his arms around us. Susan told us she had taken their 2 dogs out at 6:30 that morning. She asked my father what time he wanted to get up. He said 7 a.m. She set the alarm clock for him and left. When she returned, the elevator door opening directly into the apartment, she heard the clocks beeping, loud and steady, coming from their bedroom down the hall. She said, her voice shaking, "As soon as I heard it, I knew he was dead." For several weeks after my father's death, after his funeral at St. Ignatius Loyola on Park Avenue, after his burial next to his parents at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx,
In the middle of the night, I would panic, believing he was not really dead, that we had buried him alive. I would wake Susan up and beg her to intervene, to dig him up, to save him. The cause of my father's death. The phrase listed on his death certificate was sudden arrhythmia death syndrome, defined as a fatal heart attack in a victim who was young and seems to be in good health. He had known for decades that he had a heart defect. His aortic valve was damaged and leaked, the result, perhaps, of a bout with scarlet fever as a child. He knew he would need surgery at some point to replace the valve. He had checkups with a cardiologist every 6 months. The last appointment had been only 2 months before his death, and the results were good. The doctor told him he could postpone surgery another year. I had gone to that final appointment with my father and Susan.
When he completed his tests, he walked down the hallway in his hospital gown, his fists raised in triumph, knowing he had avoided surgery again. He dreaded the idea of being cut open, his chest scarred, months of recovery. He wanted to delay it as long as he could. After getting dressed, he sat with us in his doctor's office. The doctor asked, "What medications do you take at home?" My father pulled out a list he'd compiled on one of his yellow legal notepads, using his felt-tip black pen in his unique scrawl. He read it out loud. Advil, Anacin, Afrin, Prozac. Occasionally, when I can't sleep, Ambien. The doctor nodded and said, "Okay, none of that concerns me." 2 months after his death, we learned that he had omitted a prescription diet drug from his list. My father had a long history with diet drugs. His mother, the former actress, gave him and his sister diet pills in their teens. In college, he started taking thyroid medication to speed up his metabolism. He took it on and off through his 20s and 30s. During this time, in photographs lovingly taped in our leather family photo albums by Susan, he appears gaunt and bug-eyed. When he died, my brother, Susan, and I believed he hadn't taken diet drugs in a decade. He loved food, but was equally obsessed with health, walking miles in Central Park every day, doing yoga, hiking in Arizona several times a year. He looked healthy and trim, but not too thin, no bug eyes, not as many mood swings. And there he was in the cardiologist's office reciting his list of medications, all prescribed or over the counter, all innocent. Nothing showed up in his autopsy, performed 2 days after he died. We spent a month thinking how tragically unlucky he was in the mere 2% rate of sudden death associated with his condition, a much lower risk than dying during valve replacement surgery.
But then the confession came. His assistant telling Susan that she had been making him appointments with a diet doctor for the last year. He had opened a new account at Zittimer Pharmacy on Madison Avenue, picking up his prescribed pills in person, hiding the amber plastic bottles from Susan. We don't think the diet drug killed him. He probably would have died anyway, but it could have had an impact. We buried the secret, omitting this detail from the story of his death. We felt ashamed of it somehow, and protective of him. We wanted his life story to be pristine. For Susan, the secret felt like a deep betrayal, as shocking as an affair. She started having dreams about him, dreams she still has today, where he appears as a stranger, cold and remote, alive, but married to a different woman, with a different family. When she wakes up, she pushes this shadow away, reminding herself that their intimacy, their bond, was real, that his secret is revealing only of his frailty, his demons. There was another revelation that came soon after my father died, another blow that forever altered my understanding of him. My father left an estate that was $40 million in debt, carrying both personal loans and loans to his media company, one from a bank and one from our extended family investment partnership, a group that included my aunt and my burden cousins. It is not unusual to take on this kind of debt when growing a business, but my father's collateral was his and Susan's apartment, their house, and their collections, so it was possible they could have lost everything if the lenders had called the loans. Susan knew this was the state of things, a life on the edge of potential ruin, and they didn't hide it from me and my brother. They even made jokes about the loans, about the bank owning their apartment, but we didn't understand the scope of it until he died. He had spent money like he had an endless supply, and we'd believed that it was exactly that, endless. I returned to Davis Polk as an associate in September 1996, 8 months after my father's death. It felt like the adult choice.
A job with a significant salary, one that would cover my rent, a career step that would have impressed my father. I moved from the litigation department to the corporate department, a change that made no sense. Corporate work had no research, writing, or court time, the parts of the law I enjoyed, and I had no interest in finance. I could not even read a balance sheet. But I didn't want to be placed back on the tobacco company defense team. I had chosen the private sector, but I felt like I had to draw a line somewhere. I could have asked the assigning partners to move me to a new case. They would have done it. But it felt easier, less confrontational, to just switch departments. Corporate was divided into 3 groups: banking, mergers and acquisitions, and securities. And the firm's clients were some of the biggest banks and companies in the world. I started in banking and was quickly claimed by a gruff male partner who terrified me. With almost no training, I drafted and negotiated debt provisions with banks and opposing counsels, pretending I understood what they meant, faking my way through it. In my second year, I rotated from banking to securities, spending nights at the printer, travelling around the country to do due diligence. I worked hard, and I figured out how to do the job. But I hated it. The punishing hours, the demanding clients, the phone calls that came just as I was putting on my coat on a Friday evening, knowing, as I saw the partner's name appear on the screen, that I would be there all night, all weekend. I cried in the bathroom almost every day. I was managing more than the demands of the job.
Susan, my brother, and I met with lawyers and financial advisors every week, sometimes every day, to sort out my father's estate and sell his company. The sale allowed us to repay his loans and regain some wealth, in part because of Susan's status as a widow, which exempted her from paying capital gains taxes. But the stress continued. 2 years after my father's death, I was still fielding calls from lawyers and bankers, still having heated arguments with my brother and Susan about investments and expenses. I took these calls in a small telephone booth in the Davis Polk offices, trying to keep this part of my life hidden from other associates, ashamed of the mess we were in. Every phone call filled me with dread. The conversations, the decisions, the arguments were intertwined with the shock and grief of my father's death, a pervasive and unrelenting sense of doom. It matched my unhappiness at the firm. I felt pressure and fear wherever I turned. Another associate, a friend, introduced me to James in March of 1998. James was in his 5th year at the firm, recently returned from a 6-month stint in the Hong Kong office. I'd seen him before, passing each other in the wide carpeted hallways, nodding politely, but we'd never met. When my friend brought me into James's office, I was carrying an Academy Awards ballot. My family had an Oscar pool, a tradition since I was little, and I was considering my choices. James sat at his desk. My friend and I sat in 2 chairs facing him. I said, "What do you guys think? Who for Best Actress?" I listed the names, including Judi Dench and Kate Winslet. James looked confused. He said, "I've never heard of them." I said, "What about Best Picture? Did you see Good Will Hunting?" He said, "No, I don't know what that is. I saw Titanic. Is that on the list?" I thought, who is this guy? I found him handsome, but I was not interested. In addition to his lack of movie knowledge, I could tell he was a typical New York private school kid, the boarding school and Ivy League variety, just like me. And he looked like my father. Blonde, 6'1", lean, with proper shoes, his shirt sleeves rolled up. It was too familiar, the waspy preppiness, too appropriate. My boyfriend at the time was unemployed. He'd lost his job at a news program within days of moving in with me, a decision he pressured me into right after my father's death, when I left the West Village for an apartment on East 85th Street. I was too shell-shocked to refuse him. As I discussed the ballot with James, my boyfriend was probably sitting on my couch, watching CNBC, his feet on my antique coffee table, still sweaty from the gym. He couldn't pay any of our rent. A month after the Oscar discussion in James's office, I was rotated into his group, Investment Management. My new office was 3 doors down from his, and I was soon assigned to a deal he was running, the IPO of an internet holding company. As we worked together, I was impressed. He was very smart. He could parse and fix a memo or prospectus flawlessly within an hour. His markup looked like a work of art. He was quietly confident and always polite. He was adored by his clients and his assistant, an older woman from Long Island, the wife of a firefighter. We often sat side by side working on a document.
Once, our hands, holding pencils, brushed against each other. He was left-handed, I was right-handed. To my surprise, I felt a jolt, a spark. While James looked like my father, there were important differences. Unlike my father's unusual path through politics and media, James, as a senior associate at the firm, had a traditional job, going to work each morning in his suit, taking business trips, like a dependable father in a television show. He was ambitious about a career and making a living, in a way my father, as someone with inherited money, never was. And James was calm and even-tempered, never moody. His voice was always gentle. If you had asked me to describe him then, I would have used the word steady. He had a girlfriend and broke up with her sometime that spring. I can't remember when, but I noted it. On my birthday in May, he offered to write a complicated memo assigned to me by a partner. He stayed late into the night to do it, so that I could go out to dinner with my family and friends. A few weeks later, he came into my office and showed me a card he'd received in the mail from the Morgan Library. It was an announcement of a talk I was giving to a group of young members about my father's book collection, which we'd just donated to the library. James, holding the card aloft, looked shocked. He said, "This is you." I felt embarrassed, like I'd been found out, but I was also happy, relieved, that he had discovered the other side of my life. He came to the lecture, sitting in the back of the audience with his roommate, Mark. He brought me a Coke at the reception, weaving around my boyfriend. My brother asked, "Who's the blonde?"
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.